Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Freya and I am a doctor working in Melbourne, Australia, specifically working in pediatrics. As someone that has been through medical school and then my basic training specialty exams for pediatrics, I have done a lot of study and prep for a lot of exams. With exams, you get given a lot of unsolicited advice. So today I'm going to debunk the worst study advice that I got when I was preparing for my specialty exams. Bad advice number one is find a technique that works for you and then stick to it. So I heard this a lot. Oh, you're a visual learner, use Picmonic. Oh, you're an auditory learner, listen to podcasts. Or they might just say, flashcards are the best. Start off doing flashcards and do them the whole time and you'll be fine. Different content requires different approaches, in my opinion. And if you're anything like me, using the same technique for months on end gets boring. I found both mixing things up and also just adding in completely new systems worked really well for me. Some days I'd do flashcards, other days I would teach a concept, often to an imaginary student or my dogs or my husband. So mixing things up, adding new things in, it just worked really well for me. I think if I just felt like I needed to stick to the same thing the whole time, I would have been stuck doing something that maybe actually didn't work that well for me, and B, I would have gotten bored. The thought behind the advice of not studying during your annual leave completely makes sense in theory. You need to take breaks away from study for your mental health, physical health, to nurture other aspects of your life. And it also is shown to improve the effectiveness of how you're studying. Having said this, when I was studying for my specialty exams, not only is it a mammoth amount of content that you have a year to try and get your head around, but also you're trying to fit that around full-time work. And to be honest, my annual leave was the time that I had to be able to really focus on my study. And the reason being for this is because I found it really hard to study after my days at work. I know people that would go home and study for 4 or 5 hours. I could not do that. Maybe if I could do that, then I could have my annual leave completely free. But I actually found what worked best for me was maybe taking things at a slightly slower pace during the semester, during work. But the caveat and the little sacrifice just to get through the volume of content was that I had to dedicate a part of my annual leave to studying. So I still did take some complete breaks, even in my annual leave. So for example, in my first lot where I had 2 weeks in the middle of the year, I went to Vietnam with my partner and we spent like a week and a half there, and then I came back and had maybe 5 days and I just knuckled down and studied for those days. And even the studying for those 5 days felt relaxed and restorative because I wasn't also doing a 9, 10, 12, 13, 14 hour shift on top of that. So the third thing I wanted to talk about was this rhetoric or idea I kept hearing about how much you learn in study group. The benefit of study group wasn't that you would learn lots. It was more the emotional support, really. I learned best by myself and teaching myself concepts and working through things, not with someone telling me something. So I'm never going to learn that much in a study group, but I would 1000% recommend getting a study group because the other benefits were so great that it was worth maybe having slightly less efficient bang for buck study. If you want to actually know more about my tips for having a study group, I've made a video that you can have a little look at. So this one's maybe a little bit more specific to medical exams or anything where you've got a big backlog of remembered questions for any test and people have worked through the answers and have recorded that somewhere. So the format of so many study groups was each week you have a topic, you divide up all the past questions you've got on that topic, and then all the questions that have come up in the past on those, you go through the question that you've been given, the 10 questions you've been given, you do this whole detailed answer, write it all out, and then in study group, you present your answer to the other people in your group. But I don't know if it was actually that effective, and we ended up changing it up maybe halfway through the year. The reason it wasn't that effective is kind of what I was alluding to before about most people finding it easier to learn things by working it out for themselves rather than being told something. So this strategy of dividing the questions up into 6, you doing your questions, then presenting, really, we were finding that the 10 questions you presented, sure, like you were nailing them all over them. The 10 questions someone else presented, maybe you'd get it a little bit, but it just didn't stick as much. The other thing is, like I said, because everyone's done this for millennia in these study groups, is that we have these massive Google Drives full of the remembered questions and the worked answers that everyone's done every single year. And in the end, we started using those. So instead of dividing up the questions, we would have all the questions allocated for that session. We'd go through them individually and check to see if we agreed with the answer that had been done by previous groups. And if we all agreed with it, we'd just leave that question because there's no point going through that. We all get it. Whereas if there were questions where we disagreed with the answer that had been come up with by the previous year that went through it, then they're the ones that we would nut out and discuss and have a little bit of back and forth about. And I found this approach much more effective. So bottom line, use existing resources, use work that people have done in the past to make things easier for you now, and focus your study group times on discussion and dissection and application and identifying knowledge gaps. Bad advice number 5, the bigger the better when it comes to study groups. The idea was that you start the exam study process with a certain number of people in your cohort that want to do it, and bit by bit, people drop out. In my experience, we started with 6 people. One person pulled out and ended up sitting the next year instead, but it was still quite a big group. And we're all great friends now, so of course I don't regret it. But if you're talking about 5 or 6 doctors with really busy schedules, half of you aren't even in the same city probably because you're on your rural rotation, or even if you're there in the same city, you're on night shift, evening shift, whatever. Like, coordinating 6 doctor schedules is basically impossible, especially because you try and meet once a week. The other thing was 6 people in one session sometimes made it a little bit hard to be productive, and sometimes it took longer to get through the questions and get through the content because there was just so much going on. So bottom line, what's my better advice? Maybe 4 or 5 instead of 6-ish. Having said that, like I said before, the biggest benefit of study group, in my opinion, is the social support and the friendships. So go off if you want to have a big group, but don't think you're going to learn more if you do it that way. Bad study advice number 6 is study groups must meet in person. So my study group and I did a mix of in-person and virtual sessions. And to be honest, I much preferred the virtual sessions. We found it a little bit easier to stay on task when you're virtual, just on your computer, and you don't find yourself going on to long yapping tangents quite as much. Also, not having to commute to various people's places all over the inner suburbs of Melbourne saved hours and hours and hours. Not having to cater for 6 people, even though you only had to do that 1 in every 6 times, that's still something to do after work. And I liked that you just got to go in there, do the work, finish, and then you could go to bed. Plus, like I said before, half the time someone's on a rural rotation, or they're on nights, or maybe they're on an evening shift but it's semi-chill so they could make it to a quick Zoom session. I don't know if that ever happened, but in theory, maybe some people have chill evening shifts and they might be able to make a study group, but not actually physically be able to leave the hospital. So bottom line, choose a study group format that works for your needs and everyone's schedules. Virtual sessions are perfectly valid and often more sustainable. So that's some of the bad advice I got while studying for my specialty exams as a doctor. If you're preparing for any exams, I'd love to hear what you're doing. If you've done exams and you've heard different advice that you disagree with, agree with, let me know, and happy studying. Thanks for watching.